We moved into the house on Langley Hill when I was 9. I remember the way the porch wrapped around like arms trying to look inviting, the way the lilac bushes spilled over the fence like they were trying too hard. Everything about it screamed perfect, but only if you were standing far enough away. My parents, Helena and Richard Lane, called it a fresh start. I didn't know we needed one. I just followed quietly, clutching my backpack and staring down at my scuffed shoes while they beamed for the neighbors like we were a family in a brochure. From the outside, we looked right. Helena had her tailored blazers and designer perfume that clung to every room she entered. Richard had his polished laugh and expensive watch and the kind of presence that made people stop what they were doing and listen. And me? I was the well-behaved daughter. Quiet, polite, always reading. I knew how to stay out of the way. That was my role. They liked to show me off in small doses. "This is Elara," Helena would say, like she was introducing a feature in a house tour. Not with affection. With presentation. Like I was part of the square footage. Inside, the house was immaculate. Shiny hardwood floors, white furniture you couldn't sit on, a baby grand piano no one ever played. Helena obsessed over details, throw pillows that changed with the seasons, perfectly aligned picture frames, fresh flowers that I wasn't allowed to touch. Richard spent most of his time behind closed doors in his home office, talking about quarterly numbers and firing people who didn't deliver. We didn't yell. We didn't fight. But we didn't talk, either, not really. If I got an A, they nodded. If I won a writing contest, they asked if the prize had money attached. There were no hugs. No proud smiles. No, we're so happy you're ours. Just a kind of polite distance. I think they loved the idea of me, as long as I stayed small and quiet and didn't ask for much. So that's what I became. At school, I blended in. I did the work. I didn't cause trouble. I learned to disappear in plain sight. My friends thought I was lucky, stable family, big house, never grounded. They didn't know that when I spoke at dinner, my father would glance at the clock like I was running overtime. Or that my mother once said, "Sweetie, try not to sound so desperate when you answer questions in class. It's unbecoming." But back then, I still hoped. I still believed that if I worked harder, achieved more, followed all the rules, maybe they'd see me. Maybe I'd earn my place. Maybe I'd stop feeling like a tenant in my own life. I didn't realize then that some people don't want you to shine. Some people only love mirrors. They don't know what to do with light. That house on Langley Hill looked like a dream to everyone else. But I knew better. It was just a well-decorated cage. People used to tell my mother she had the perfect life. And she'd agree with them, with that frozen, photo-ready smile she could summon on command. She'd sweep her hand toward the porch like she was unveiling a luxury product, our house, our dog, our family, and say, "We're very blessed. Everything's in its place." She wasn't lying. Everything really was in its place. Too much so. Our house looked like it had been staged for a magazine shoot that never ended. Fresh flowers. White furniture. Polished surfaces that smelled faintly of lemon and control. I once dropped a grape on the rug in the living room, and my mother looked at me like I'd set the drapes on fire. We had a routine. Richard, my father, though he preferred Dad, when we were in public, left for work at exactly 7:42 every morning. Helena left 10 minutes later, high heels clicking like a metronome down the front steps. She was always on a call. Always talking about projections, expansion, engagement metrics. I didn't know what half of it meant. I just knew better than to interrupt her. I left next. Walked to the bus stop alone. I always walked alone. I was 10, maybe 11, the first time I realized no one in my family asked how my day was. Not in that casual, distracted way most parents do. Not even the performative kind they could say they said. Just silence. I'd sit at the table, fork scraping quietly across my plate, and listen to them talk about work, traffic, the new neighbors with the ugly mailbox. I could have been invisible. Sometimes I felt like I was. Except when I wasn't. Because I wasn't allowed to be messy. Or loud. Or opinionated. I was expected to be present, but only if I was silent, helpful, and convenient. When guests came over, my mother would summon me like a prop. "Elara," Show everyone your report card. Tell them about that book you read. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked through me. Like she was reciting a checklist. Like I was an item she'd ordered that arrived without damage. I learned to smile on cue. To retreat when the spotlight faded. To sit on the stairs after the door closed and wonder what I was doing wrong. What else I could do? I kept my room clean. I stayed out of trouble. I got straight A's. But there was no warmth waiting for me at the end of the day. No reward. No pride. Just more stillness. More expectations. My father once told a group of his colleagues that I was self-sufficient. He said it like it was a compliment. Like it meant they'd done their job so well, I'd raised myself. And maybe I had. The truth was, I knew how to disappear before I ever learned how to be seen. And yet, I still tried. I still believed that if I was perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect silence, they might look up one day and realize I mattered. But what I didn't understand back then was that in my family, love wasn't something you earned. It was something you were born into. Or not. Sundays were always the quietest days in our house, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that felt staged, artificial. Everything had a role. Every moment was polished. Church in the morning. Brunch by noon. The whole routine unfolded like clockwork, and if you didn't look too closely, you'd think we were the kind of family people envied. Helena always looked flawless on Sundays. Her makeup set just right, her perfume soft but expensive, her heels tapping against the marble entryway with rhythmic precision. She treated church less like worship and more like a press event. Richard wore cufflinks and a fixed smile that only faltered when we got home. He didn't really talk to me much. Not unless he needed something, his reading glasses, or a paper he left in the car, or a reminder that the garage needed sweeping. Even then, his voice was clipped, perfunctory, like he was giving instructions to a personal assistant, not a daughter. After church, they'd host brunch for whatever people Helena was trying to impress that week. She rotated the guest list like a seating chart at a gala: lawyers, executives, parents from the school board. I was the silent centerpiece, positioned just enough to be seen, not enough to be heard. Helena used to pull me aside right before the doorbell rang and say, "Smile when people look at you. You don't want them thinking we're raising a moody teenager." She meant it as a warning, not advice. I'd spend the afternoons playing the role. Set the table, pour water, hand out napkins. Laugh softly when someone made a dry joke about interest rates or HOA bylaws. My name would float into conversations like a label on a wine bottle. Elara's doing well in school. Elara helps around the house. Elara's very responsible. No one ever asked what I liked, what I wanted, what I dreamed of. They just nodded politely, as if I were another example of Helena's perfect taste, well-behaved, well-dressed, non-disruptive. When the guests left and the dishes were cleaned and the air finally stopped smelling like citrus polish, I'd retreat to my room. I wasn't allowed to close the door. It looks antisocial, Helena had said once. So I learned to make my silence look casual, comfortable, expected. On those evenings, I'd sit at my window and watch the neighbors walk their dogs, their laughter floating up through the trees like music from another world. Our house never had laughter. We had order, stillness, clean lines, a void no one acknowledged. There were photographs in the hallway, rows of frames Helena updated every 6 months. Family portraits from studios with neutral backgrounds and coordinated outfits. In all of them, I wore beige. Always beige. It wasn't until years later that I realized I had no memory of choosing my own clothes for those photos. One picture, just one, showed me grinning wide, missing a front tooth, arms around Winston when he was still a puppy. I'd printed it from a disposable camera I saved for months to buy. It was never hung up. I found it in a drawer once, face down, with a sticky note on the back, replaced with holiday photo. They replaced me in the frames before they ever did it in real life. The thing is, I didn't realize how deeply I was being erased. Not yet. I thought that maybe this was what family felt like, distant, rehearsed, silent. I thought maybe all parents were too tired to notice their kids. I thought if I just kept being good, They'd finally say something that felt like love. But what I didn't know back then, what I was just beginning to sense in the quiet, was that they were waiting. Not for me to change. For something better. I was just turning 9 when they told me I was going to have a little brother. Helena didn't sit me down or smile sweetly or talk to me like I mattered. She mentioned it in passing while checking her reflection in the hallway mirror, like it was just another appointment in her planner. "We're expecting," she said, smoothing her blouse. "It'll be good for you to have someone else around the house." Someone else. That's what he was before he had a name. Just a concept. A replacement. An inevitability. And I was just supposed to move over. They named him Caleb. I remember standing in the hospital room, gripping a balloon I picked out myself because no one told me if I was supposed to bring anything. Helena was glowing. Richard stood next to her like he'd just closed $1 million deal. Caleb was wrapped in a blue blanket like a present they'd finally earned. No one asked if I wanted to hold him. No one asked how I felt. I smiled for the picture and then stepped back, already fading from the frame. At first, I told myself it was normal. Babies needed more attention. They were fragile. They cried. I did what I thought was expected. I offered to help. I cleaned up after him. I learned how to warm bottles and fold his onesies. Helena didn't thank me. She just started assigning me tasks without asking. My name was no longer Elara. It was, "Can you take him for a minute?" And Elara, he spit up again, and "Why didn't you clean this sooner?" The shift was slow at first. Subtle. One less "good job" at dinner. One more eye roll when I brought home a perfect paper. "You're old enough to manage your own assignments," Richard said one night when I told him I got the highest score on my math test. Then he turned back to Caleb, who was cooing at his stuffed giraffe like it was speaking ancient truths. I became background noise. By the time I was 12, the house had transformed. Our once perfect living room now had padded corners and primary-colored toys scattered like landmines. Photos of Caleb were printed and framed before the hospital ink on his birth certificate dried. My own pictures were quietly removed from the walls, replaced, one by one, with his face in every angle. Laughing, sleeping, drooling. There were albums dedicated to his bath time. I wasn't in them. My birthday that year was low-key. Caleb had a cold. Helena was tired. Richard had meetings. I made my own sandwich and ate it on the back porch with Winston, who was already being nudged out of the house the same way I was. Quietly. Strategically. Like he didn't belong anymore. Like we didn't. Caleb started talking early, and Helena treated every sound he made like it was proof of genius. I once overheard her say, "He's so much more expressive than Elara ever was." I wasn't even in the room. I don't think she knew I could hear her. Or maybe she didn't care. I started noticing something else, too. How often Helena touched him. How often Richard smiled at him. How they lit up when he entered a room, even if he was just babbling nonsense and slamming a spoon against a chair. I tried to count the last time either of them hugged me without it being a posed photograph. I couldn't remember. That's when it started. The feeling that I was a placeholder. A prototype. The test version they tolerated until the real child came along. I stopped asking for things. I stopped sharing stories about school. I stopped leaving my bedroom door open. They didn't notice. Or if they did, they never said a word. But I did. I noticed everything. And with every smile they gave Caleb that they'd never given me, something inside me began to crystallize. Cold. Clear. Unmovable. Not jealousy. Not even hate. Just the knowledge that one day, when the opportunity came, I'd show them exactly what they turned away from. Exactly what they gave up. I turned 15 without candles. There was no cake, no card, no dinner out. Not even a happy birthday muttered over the kitchen sink. Helena had a meeting that ran late. Richard was out of town. Caleb had a stomach bug, and the whole house bent itself around his mild discomfort like it was a national emergency. I spent most of the day in my room, headphones in, pretending not to notice that no one had remembered. But I noticed. Of course I did. That night, while Helena rocked Caleb in his nursery and scrolled through her phone like nothing had been missed, I microwaved a frozen burrito and ate it in silence. No one asked where I'd been all day. No one even glanced up. That was the night something hardened in me. I wasn't shocked anymore. I wasn't even hurt. Just quiet. I started watching my family like I wasn't part of it, like I was observing strangers from behind a glass wall. They'd laugh at Caleb's burbling nonsense like he was telling jokes. They'd cheer when he held a crayon correctly. Helena once clapped like she'd witnessed a miracle because he stacked 3 plastic cups without knocking them over. I'd taught myself to braid my own hair, sew a torn seam, and balance a monthly budget by the time I was 10. No one clapped for that. I stopped trying to impress them. Not out of rebellion. Just self-preservation. The more effort I gave, the more invisible I became. At school, I still did well. Top of my class. But I kept that part of me tucked away like something private, something sacred. I learned that pride, in the Lane household, only belonged to Caleb. He got piano lessons despite never practicing. I'd begged for them once, years ago, and was told there wasn't time. He got a telescope after pointing at the moon once and calling it the shiny cookie. I'd spent every evening of that same summer on the roof with a library book on constellations. No one noticed. No one came up to see. It wasn't just about the things. It was the air. The atmosphere. The way they looked at him, like he was a sunrise and I was an afterthought. Every milestone of his was celebrated with balloons and matching outfits and professional photographers. When I got a perfect SAT score, I left the results envelope on the kitchen table. It disappeared by morning. No congratulations. No comment. Just gone. They didn't hate me. That would have required feeling something. No, what they gave me was worse. Neglect disguised as normal. I spent more time at the library after that. Volunteered to shelve books, organize back rooms, anything that let me stay away longer. I started taking the long way home. I'd sit on park benches with my backpack in my lap and my eyes unfocused, listening to the wind, reminding myself I existed. That I was real. That I wasn't just filling space in a house where I had no voice. Caleb was growing into the role they had scripted for him. Golden boy, miracle child, future leader of the free world. I saw how Helena stared at him with this almost manic adoration, like he was proof she'd gotten something right. Like he could erase everything wrong with the first draft. Me. But I wasn't broken. I was awake. I started keeping notes. Not diary entries. Those are for people who expect someone to care about their story. No, I kept records. Times. Dates. Things they said. The scholarships I applied for on my own. The nights I covered Caleb's tantrums so Helena could sleep. The money I earned tutoring other students after school. Money they borrowed more than once and never gave back. I became my own historian. Because I knew eventually I'd need proof. Not for them. For me. I turned 18 on a Thursday. No party. No card. Not even a mention over breakfast. Caleb had a spelling quiz that morning, and Helena was too busy quizzing him on words he couldn't pronounce to remember what day it was. I poured my own coffee, ate my own breakfast, and left for school without a word. That was normal by then. I didn't expect celebration anymore. I didn't even feel sad. That was the strange part. There wasn't anger. Not yet. Just this dull acceptance, like standing outside in the cold long enough that your body forgets how to shiver. After school, I walked home slowly. It was supposed to be a milestone day. I wasn't a kid anymore. I was legal. Independent. I had plans, small ones, quiet ones. I'd saved money from tutoring, library shifts, and odd jobs Helena never even noticed. I was thinking maybe I'd use it to take one weekend away. Just one. A bus ticket, a cheap motel, a little silence that actually belonged to me. But when I pushed open the front door, my whole world tilted. The air inside the house felt wrong, too still. Not the usual hum of the dishwasher or Caleb humming to himself off-key. No, this was staged silence. Heavy. Intentional. I set my bag down slowly, my heartbeat already picking up speed even before I turned the corner into my bedroom. And there she was. Helena stood over my bed, folding my clothes into one of my own suitcases, calmly, neatly, like she was packing up a guest who had overstayed her welcome. My drawers were open, half empty. My books had been stacked into a cardboard box I didn't recognize. My bedsheets were gone. The mattress was bare. I stood frozen in the doorway. "What are you doing?" She didn't even flinch. "You're 18 now, Elara," she said, like that answered everything. Like that one sentence justified the scene in front of me. "We thought it would be best for you to start this next chapter on your own. You're capable. You've always been so independent. We thought." That's what she said. Like Richard had weighed in from his corner office and Caleb had cast the deciding vote. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Light, fast, familiar. Caleb stood at the end of the hall, arms crossed, expression smug in that 8-year-old way kids get when they've been fed too much power and not enough love. "Mom said this is my room now," he said. "You're not supposed to be here." That's when it hit me. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't about space or timing or practicality. This had been planned. I didn't say a word. My mouth opened, then closed again. I wanted to ask if they were serious, if this was some kind of test, but I already knew the answer. They weren't cruel about it. That's the part that still gets me. They were polite, calm, clinical, as if removing me from their lives was just another item on Helena's weekly checklist. Meal prep. Budget meeting. Dispose of daughter. I walked into my room and picked up the suitcase she had nearly finished packing. The handle was warm from her touch. I zipped it closed and didn't look at her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing my face. I didn't ask where I was supposed to go or how I was expected to get there. She hadn't thought that far ahead, or maybe she had, and just didn't care. I walked past Caleb, who smirked like he'd won. I didn't look at him either. I stepped out of the house I grew up in without ceremony, without goodbye, without a single person asking me to stay. It didn't rain that night, but it might as well have. The sky felt heavy. The sidewalks cracked under my shoes like they knew what had just happened. I walked until the sun dipped below the trees, and then I called the only person I knew would answer, someone who'd seen me when I was still trying to disappear. He didn't ask questions. Just gave me an address and said, "Come here." That's where I slept that night. On a borrowed couch, curled into myself, every bone in my body aching with a kind of grief I couldn't name. But even then, I didn't cry. Because underneath the shock, underneath the quiet rage and the familiar emptiness, something else had started to form. Not pain. Not despair. Purpose. They had thrown me out like trash. So I was going to become something they couldn't ignore. And when they came crawling back, and I knew, eventually, I'd be ready. The first few weeks after they kicked me out blurred together into a haze of borrowed floors and sleepless nights. I bounced between couches, friends from school, coworkers from the library, anyone whose parents wouldn't ask too many questions. I kept my suitcase zipped and my voice low. I never stayed longer than 3 nights in one place, not because people weren't kind, but because I couldn't stomach the feeling of being anyone's pity case. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted my own space. My own name on something that couldn't be taken from me. I got a part-time job at a thrift store under the table. Minimum wage. Long hours. The kind of work that left your fingers smelling like old plastic and detergent, but I took every shift I could. I stocked books. Cleaned dressing rooms. Hauled boxes up flights of stairs with muscles I didn't know I had. I said yes to everything and I listened. To customers. To coworkers. To the regulars who came in for coffee mugs and left with their lives spilling out in conversation. I learned more in that back room than I ever did at home. One morning, standing at a bus stop in the freezing wind with a coffee I could barely afford, I saw a man in a wrinkled suit staring at my cup like it was the last warm thing on earth. He looked dead on his feet. I handed it to him without thinking. He took it with a muttered thanks and drank it like it saved his life. That moment stuck with me. Longer than it should have. I started watching people at bus stops after that, how they all had coffee, how their faces changed after the first sip. How it wasn't just caffeine. It was armor. It was ritual. It was survival. I spent that night lying awake on a basement mattress, staring at the ceiling, my brain whirring. Coffee was everywhere, but no one sold it right in the places that needed it most, on the sidewalks, at the crack of dawn, where people didn't have time to wait in lines or hear their name misspelled on a cup. What if I brought it to them? Hot. Fast. Honest. The next day I borrowed a laptop and started researching. Street vending permits. Health codes. Commercial-grade thermoses. I read everything I could find. I made notes. Budget lists. Inventory estimates. I didn't have the money, but I had a plan. I picked up extra shifts. Sold half my clothes. Found a used equipment seller in a warehouse 40 minutes outside the city. Bought an old folding table for $10, a dented pushcart for $40. It wobbled. The handle squeaked. I loved it instantly. Carmen, a girl from the thrift store with sleeve tattoos and a heart way too big, offered her uncle's garage as a workspace. We cleaned the cart for 2 days straight, bleach, steel wool, elbow grease. I stenciled the name myself with black paint and shaky hands, Third Rail Coffee. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't professional. But it was mine. I launched on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., just off Westfield and 6th. No sign except the one I'd handwritten on recycled cardboard. Strong coffee for people who don't have time for weak anything. I stood there in the cold, heart pounding, thermoses steaming, waiting to see if anyone would care. They did. By 7:45, I'd made $28. By 9:10, I was sold out. The next morning, I showed up earlier. Added a second thermos. By the end of the week, I had repeat customers, nurses, janitors, exhausted paralegals who handed me crumpled bills and said, "You're a lifesaver." I wasn't just serving coffee. I was serving relief. I saw it in their faces. The way they came to trust me. Depend on me. Every dollar went into a jar I kept hidden under a loose tile in Carmen's garage. I counted it at night when no one was looking, my fingers trembling as the stacks grew taller. That money wasn't for rent. It wasn't for clothes. It was for escape. For independence. For revenge, eventually. Because every cup I poured was another nail in the coffin of the version of me they tried to erase. The obedient daughter. The invisible shadow. That girl was gone. Now I had a business. A name. A growing line of people who saw me, who valued me. And soon, very soon, they would see me too. But by then, it'd be too late. Within 6 months, Third Rail Coffee wasn't just a card on a sidewalk anymore. It was a name whispered in office elevators, a pin dropped on maps, a schedule penciled into the planners of people who ran on caffeine and no sleep. I expanded to a second cart, this one man by Carmen, who worked like she'd been waiting her whole life to prove people wrong, too. We started splitting shifts. She took one corner, I took the other. I trained her exactly how I worked, fast, precise, no pretense. No fake smiles, no syrupy greetings. Just strong coffee and stronger presence. We weren't here to be cute. We were here to run shit. The early crowds turned into loyalists. They didn't want chain shop sugar bombs or their names spelled wrong on paper cups. They wanted what I gave them. No nonsense. Damn good coffee that made their mornings suck less. By the time my 1-year business anniversary rolled around, we had lines forming before sunrise. I'd grown into the kind of woman who stood behind her cart like she owned the street, like nothing could touch her, and in a way, it couldn't. I'd built it all from nothing. From scratch. From the same concrete sidewalk I'd once cried on the night my own mother packed up my things. I'd stopped crying a long time ago. Instead, I started filing for an LLC. I hired a part-time bookkeeper, rented a shared commercial kitchen, learned about tax brackets and city codes. Every piece of the business that scared me, I learned. Every form I couldn't understand, I translated with grit and a highlighter. My fingers bled from work. My spine ached. I never took a day off. But every cup I served felt like proof. I had survived what they did to me. And I was winning. And then, one morning, everything changed. It was a Wednesday. Mid-March. Still cold, but the sun had started showing up earlier, like it was rooting for me. I was parked outside a courthouse, same as usual, pouring black coffee into a reusable mug for a regular named Patrice, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't answer. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again. This time a voicemail. I played it on my break. The voice on the other end made my blood chill, then boil. Elara, sweetheart, it's Mom. Your father and I heard about your business from a friend. Can you believe it? We're so proud of you. We had no idea. Call us back, okay? Let's catch up. She said it like I'd gone on vacation. Like she hadn't shoved me out of her life with the quiet efficiency of someone decluttering a closet. Like they hadn't turned my room into Caleb's kingdom the minute I turned 18 and dared to be inconvenient. I deleted the message without listening to the end. But they didn't stop there. The next day, Richard called. Then Caleb texted, Mom says she misses you. I hadn't heard from him in years, and suddenly he was in my inbox using the word family, like it was a blanket they'd always kept warm for me. The emails started next, photos, updates, awkward attempts at small talk. They'd found out I was successful. And now, suddenly, I was worth noticing again. I sat in my tiny apartment that night, lights off, listening to the hum of the city outside my window while their messages stacked like paper cuts on my phone. I could have replied. I could have accepted the compliments. I could have let them slither their way back into my life like none of it had happened. That's what they expected. That's what people like Helena and Richard always expect. When they see value, they move toward it, like moths to a flame. Even if they're the ones who tried to stomp it out first. So I didn't respond. I didn't rage. I didn't explain myself or ask why now, why me, why they only wanted to call me daughter when my name started trending in local coffee blogs. I just called them back once. Helena answered on the second ring, breathless with something that sounded like rehearsed joy. Elara, darling. I didn't let her finish. I said, slowly, clearly, and calmly, we don't have anything to talk about. Then I hung up and blocked every number they had. Let them taste silence. Let them sit in it. The same silence they fed me for years. Only now I owned it. After I blocked their numbers, I figured that would be the end of it. I was naive. I'd spent so long believing they never really noticed me that I underestimated what people like Helena and Richard did when they realized they'd thrown away something valuable. They didn't apologize. They didn't reflect. They regrouped. I should have seen it coming. Their silence wasn't just absence, it was strategy. And when silence stopped serving them, they changed tactics. It started with emails. Helena's tone was cloying at first, soaked in performative affection. We've been so impressed watching your success from afar, she wrote. I always knew you had a head for business. As if she hadn't spent most of my childhood acting like I was barely a functional accessory. As if she hadn't folded my clothes into a suitcase with her mouth set in a line, like I was a task she couldn't wait to cross off her to-do list. Her words now dripped with selective memory. She talked about catching up, about healing old wounds, and even about Caleb, how he asked about me. That part was almost funny. I hadn't gotten a single message from him since the night he smirked in the hallway and told me I wasn't supposed to be there. Then came the photos. Helena sent pictures of the house, fresh flowers on the porch, the family room redecorated in soft pastels. Caleb on the honor roll, Richard grinning beside a new grill. They all looked so proud of themselves, like nothing had ever cracked, like there wasn't a gaping hole in the middle of that glossy life. The emails were curated carefully, but they all had the same subtext, look what you're missing. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't missing anything. I had found peace and distance. I had built something from the ashes they left me in. I wasn't yearning for reunion. I was standing on the ground I paved with their rejection. They didn't give up easily. When the emails stopped getting replies, Helena showed up in person. She found one of my carts, Carmen's location, actually, and tried to act surprised to see her. She asked for an Americano. Carmen didn't blink. She made it like any other order, handed it over, and said, "That'll be $4. Helena stood there, holding her overpriced drink, waiting for something more, some recognition, some crack in the armor. Carmen told me later that she left without drinking it. Just stood on the sidewalk for a while, staring at the cart like she'd expected it to open up and forgive her. A week after that, I got a letter. An actual letter. Handwritten, which was hilarious, considering Helena never wrote anything by hand unless it was going on a holiday card. She said she understood why I was upset, and that families had rough patches, and that she wanted to invite me to dinner. Just the four of us, she wrote, as though Caleb and I had ever been equals, as though we had some mutual sibling bond that hadn't been drowned in 10 years of erasure. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That's the thing they couldn't wrap their heads around. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for their love, their approval, their guilt. I had made my peace without their permission. And now that I was doing well, thriving, actually, they wanted to fold me back into the narrative like I'd always been part of it. But I hadn't. I had been discarded. And I had built myself back up from the cement floor of that reality. So I let them twist. Let them try. Let them stew in their regret. Because I remembered everything. The coldness. The silence. The day Helena looked me in the face and told me I was 18 now. The way Caleb's voice echoed through the hallway with that smug, innocent cruelty when he told me, "You're not supposed to be here." And now? I wasn't. I wasn't theirs anymore. And they weren't mine. I thought ignoring them would be enough. I thought if I kept my distance, made no contact, gave them nothing, not anger, not answers, not even acknowledgement, they'd eventually stop trying. But people like Helena and Richard don't stop when they're told no. They stop when they've been punished for it. I didn't want revenge. Not then. What I wanted was peace. Control over my own space. My own name, my own future, untainted by theirs. But apparently, they weren't finished taking things from me. I came home one evening after a 12-hour stretch between both coffee carts, exhausted, sore, the kind of tired that lives in your bones, and the second I opened my apartment door, I knew something was wrong. The lights were on. There were shoes I didn't recognize by the door heels, expensive. The smell hit me next. Helena's perfume. The same one she wore during brunches, parties, and PTA events. Sharp, floral, and unforgettable. For a split second, I thought I was hallucinating. Then I heard the water running. I walked into my bathroom and found Jessica, Caleb's goddamn babysitter from years ago, apparently now a family friend, wearing my robe, drying her hair with my towel. She looked up like I'd walked into her hotel suite. "Oh," she said flatly, barely pausing to glance at me. "You're back early." My voice came out too calm. "Why are you in my apartment?" She had the audacity to shrug. "Your mom gave me a key. Said it'd be fine while I figured things out." She said it like this was temporary. Like she was entitled to stay as long as her life felt inconvenient. I stared at her, blinking slowly, trying to make sense of how far this had gone. Not only had they tried to slide back into my life, they'd handed my home to someone else. Without asking. Without warning. Like it still belonged to them. Like I still belonged to them. I walked into the kitchen. My mail was rifled through. My groceries rearranged. My books shoved aside to make room for whatever overpriced crap she'd brought in. I opened the fridge. My labeled containers were gone. Boutique spa water bottles lined the shelves. My heart was pounding. Not in panic, but fury. Cold, calculated fury. I opened the drawer where I kept my spare keys. Empty. When I turned around, she was scrolling through her phone again. "Your parents are actually on the way," she said casually, as if that would soften the blow. "They said they wanted to talk. I think they're trying to mend things, you know? Be a family again." I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just burst out, sharp, bitter, uncontainable. A laugh that tasted like the end of whatever hope they had left. When Helena and Richard arrived 10 minutes later, they didn't look guilty. They looked smug. Like they'd done something reasonable. "You were away," Richard said calmly. "The apartment was empty. Jessica needed a place. We assumed you wouldn't mind." "You assumed wrong," I said. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I walked to the door and opened it wide. "Get out. All of you. Now." Helena blinked like I'd slapped her. "Elara, don't be dramatic. Leave." My voice cut through her sentence like a scalpel. "You don't live here. You never did. And if you think you have any right to anything in this apartment or in my life, you're more delusional than I thought." Jessica started to protest. I held up a finger. "You set foot in here again, I will call the police. The locks are getting changed tonight." You can explain the trespassing charge to the judge. Helena's mouth twisted into something between a sneer and a pout. After everything we've done for you. I met her eyes, hard and unblinking. You mean kicking me out? Replacing me? Selling the car I paid for? Giving away my space to a stranger? Was that the part where you were being generous? For once, she had no words. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. Jessica scoffed, grabbed her purse, and stormed out like she was the victim. When the door closed behind them, I locked it. Then I stood there in the silence they left behind and let myself feel it fully, not grief, not betrayal. Certainty. They weren't just manipulative. They were entitled. They believed, down to their bones, that no matter how badly they treated me, I would always be available to them. That I would always come back. They were wrong. That night, I changed the locks. I updated the security system. I called my lawyer. And I started documenting everything. Because now it was war. And I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was the reckoning. There's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is loud, petty, flashy. It wants witnesses. Justice is quiet, controlled. It's about setting the scales back in place and making damn sure they stay that way. And after everything they did to me, after the years of silence, the erasure, the way they discarded me like a piece of furniture they'd outgrown, I didn't want revenge. I wanted to end the story on my terms. After I kicked them out of my apartment, they tried to double down. Helena sent more emails, this time angrier. Guilt-ridden paragraphs mixed with manipulative little stabs. We're still your family, you'll regret this. Don't let pride ruin what we can rebuild. Richard called from blocked numbers, tried to act like this was all a misunderstanding. Caleb even sent a video of himself, missing his big sister. He was reading from a script. I could hear it in his tone. Flat. Off. It didn't work. I ignored it all. Instead, I focused on my business. Third Rail Coffee was no longer just a couple of carts, it was becoming a city staple. I leased a corner space downtown and opened a brick and mortar. Sleek concrete floors, industrial lighting, no bullshit. Just great coffee, open from 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., no music, no frills. I wanted it to feel like an engine room, not a lounge. The first week, we sold out every day. By the second, we had interviews lined up with 2 local news outlets. I had a wait list of baristas wanting to train under me. People started referring to me as Elara Lane, entrepreneur, owner, CEO, not daughter. They tried to show up at the grand opening. I'd already sent the security team their names and photos. They never made it past the sidewalk. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment long before the ribbon cutting. Quietly, while I worked, while I built. I gathered records, bank statements, copies of my own documents Helena had once lost. I had emails from my high school counselor confirming I'd applied to scholarships on my own. I had texts from the day they kicked me out. I even had the footage from my apartment building showing Jessica letting herself in with the key Helena had no legal right to. And then I made it public. Not viral. I'm not a teenager with a TikTok grudge. But real. Documented. Quietly leaked to the right people. The school board Helena still sat on. The financial firm Richard still pitched to. I never said anything cruel. I just laid out the facts. Let the timeline speak for itself. They lost their reputations without me ever saying a word. I didn't have to destroy them. They'd built their entire lives on image. I just handed them a mirror. Now? I live 3 floors above my flagship store. The building is mine, signed with my name, not theirs. I see their neighborhood on the news sometimes. The house on Langley Hill just sold again. Fresh coat of paint. Different family. Smiling couple with a toddler and a golden retriever. Looks like a dream. But I know what can hide inside a perfect-looking house. And I'll never go back. The last time Helena tried to reach me, she sent a single sentence in an email. Are you really never coming home? I read it on a rainy night, sitting in my office, my name etched into the door in gold leaf. I stared at those words, thinking about that girl they threw out without a second thought. And I wrote back. Just 5 words. I already built my own. Then I hit send. And I never looked back.